before I begin, maybe we could look at our phones and keep them on silent or switched off mode. You all know the PIC handle for those who are addictive on social media, especially Twitter. So feel free, doing your tweets, retweets, and replies, and likes and favorites and everything else. But silent mode would be really, really appreciated. Thank you. So to begin with, I stand here, and it's a great pleasure to stand here to welcome all of you here. If you please join me, put your hands together to welcome Dr. Naushad Forbes, Mr. Ravi Pandit, and also my friend whom I call the landlord of the building, Dr. Ananta Sardeshmukh. I guess Dr. Sardeshmukh would soon be introducing the speakers to you. So very briefly, just to introduce while the speakers as well know the audience very well. It's a great pleasure that we have in the audience, we have Ms. Anu Aga, Mr. Christopher Benninger, our other trustees of PIC, the past presidents of Maratha Chamber of Commerce, the current vice presidents, the executive committee members, the members of PIC, and there are many, many students also who have joined in. And you know what, in general, the programs of PIC and MCCIA who together do this are always open for anyone and everyone. And in that spirit of inclusiveness, there are many more people, many more Punekars in general who are interested who could come here today. So we welcome you all here. This is a lecture. I'm just going to talk a minute or two about the lecture series, and then I'll be handing it over to Dr. Sardeshmukh to introduce the guests. This lecture series on Make in India started with advice from the leadership of both PIC and MCCIA. I think Mr. Magar is here, who talked with Dr. Kelkar and Dr. Mashilkar, and we thought of doing it together with MCCIA, and that was the more apt thing to do here in Pune. So far, we have had 3 lectures in this series, and this is the 4th one we would be doing. The first lecture, the inaugural one, was launched by the Vice Chairman of Lupin, and Dr. Kamal Sharma talked about the Make in India from perspective of the pharmaceutical industry as well as a bit broader one. On 20th August, we had Dr. Kalyani. Dr. Baba Kalyani talked about his own lessons learned at Bharat Forge. The third one was by Mr. Pramod Chaudhary on 29th of December, the incoming president of Maratha Chamber of Commerce. So he talked about his experiences and where he started from and how did it kind of grow up and what he did. This is the 4th lecture in this series, and it's a special one because we thought that while we have learned lessons of individual organizations in the spectrum of the industries that they operated in, we wanted to make this a little more broader in the scope. And we couldn't have got someone better than Dr. Forbes, who is the co-chairman at Forbes Marshall, and you all know that he's a president at the CII now. So we requested him to talk about it, and he would be talking specifically on India's national innovation system. So it's going beyond just the Make in India per se. He will talk about India's national innovation system. These lectures, when we put together, as you know, PIC comes up with these policy papers, and that's one of those key things that we do. One of our members, Dr. Satish Devdar, who is a professor at IIM Ahmedabad, he's putting together a paper on this lecture series. He is almost 3/4 understandably done with it. After this lecture, he'll revise the paper, and that paper is what we would intend to submit to the relevant ministers and relevant secretaries in Delhi as well as Mumbai. So that's where it is going forward to. Of course, it's a great pleasure to have, as I said, Dr. Forbes do this concluding lecture. I'm not going to take much time. I'll request Dr. Sardeshmukh to please introduce the speaker as well as the chairperson of the day.
Today's speaker, Dr. Naushad Forbes. Today's chairperson, Dr. Ravi Pandit. Office bearers of MCCI, trustees of PIC, members of PIC, members of MCCI. Ladies and gentlemen, being a landlord of here, I think I must once again welcome you to the premises of Maratha Chamber of Commerce industries and agriculture. Today is an historical event because I think for the first time the president of CIA is coming on the dais of MCCI. Not because there is a rivalry, there is a perfect camaraderie. And even if you look at MCCI and CIA, 65% of CIA is in MCCI. I'm not referring to the membership, but I'm referring to the alphabet C and I. And, you know, if you look at the College of Presidents of MCCI and College of Presidentship of CIA, you will observe that many of the MCCI president later on became the president of CII. So I always say that they hone their skill here in MCCI to take up larger responsibility as CII. Today's both the speakers, they definitely need no introduction, and they are well known to, of course, MCCI, PIC, as well as you all. But you know, still there are certain things which you may not be aware. I think, have you ever seen a lecturer or a professor becoming a chairman of a big company? Have you come across any lecturer or professor assuming that position? And you will see today Dr. Naushad Forbes, who was a lecturer and consulting professor at Stanford University, and today he is the chairman of Forbes Marshall, India's leading steam engineering and control instrumentation firm. He chaired the steam engineering companies within his group. Between 1987 and 2004, he completed his, he was a lecturer and consulting professor at Stanford University, and he developed a course on technology in newly industrializing countries. He received, before that he received his bachelor's and master's and PhD degree all from Stanford University. He's on the board of several companies, and as I mentioned, he is currently the serving president of CII. Welcome to MCCI, sir, and welcome to this PIC function. The second, you know, the fact which you may not be knowing, that all along, and even on the dais, you will see the nameplate which is there, which says Mr. Ravi Pandit. But let me tell you, he is really Dr. Ravi Pandit, because sometime back, the Tilak Maharashtra University of Pune, a very old and well-known university, offered him, awarded the honorary doctorate of letters on him. Ravi Pandit has been president of MCCI. He has been actively involved in institutions like MCCI, even NASCOM, CII, and also Janvani. He has been the founder trustee of Janvani, and I think the premises where you are sitting right now, this old MCCI trade tower, I think a lot of credit goes to him for getting this building constructed. There's a long list of his achievements. We all know he's basically a chartered accountant. Then he also did his master's in management from from Sloan School of Management, MIT, Cambridge. And after that, we all know he has been very actively engaged in the IT field. If you look at his awards, the awards for excellence in business which has been received by his company KPIT, there is a long list of 21, and we all Maharashtrian know that 21 is a very special figure for all of us. Then if you look at the awards for contribution to the community and society, there's a list of 9 awards, and I'm sure he will reach 11 and even go beyond that. So today we have a very excellent faculty, and we are going to witness a very interesting discussion on the topic of India's National Innovation System. So may I now request Dr. Naushad Forbes to to present his views on this topic. Thank you very much.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's especially a pleasure to be actually talking in Pune, which has become something of a rare. I describe myself as a frequent visitor to Pune this year. So even though the title of the talk is our National Innovation System, as you'll see, it actually, I think, provides a very useful lens of looking at the Make in India program, looking at manufacturing in India, and looking at some of the key challenges that we have to achieve the objectives that we've been setting for ourselves in manufacturing. Prashant, I have a request. I know that, I'm supposed to talk for 40 minutes and then we have 20 minutes for questions. Now, the goal that I have is to talk for 30 minutes and have 30 minutes for questions. So if you can prompt me at 25 minutes. Sure. Yeah, so I can then stop talking in another 5. Yeah? Okay, so let me set the context for this talk. And by the way, I should say also that it's a particular pleasure to be talking to a group that includes so many friends and people that have not only been close friends over the years, but from whom I've learned so much over the years. And let me make a particular comment about Ravi. When I was doing my PhD and my fieldwork in Pune in 1984, Ravi was one of my guides. I used to go to him on a regular basis for input and guidance on what I was finding and why I was finding it and what I needed to do next. So it's a particular pleasure to be sharing that platform with you, Ravi. So let me set the context for this talk with a perspective of where we are 25 years after the reform process began, and then use that perspective to make a proposition. So where are we 25 years after reforms began? Well, as you would know, India's product and service markets have been transformed, have changed beyond recognition in these last 25 years. We take it all for granted now, but as an affluent Indian in 1991, I just bought a new car which was only a 10-year-old model, which had replaced another new car which was a 25-year-old model. I bought in 1991 many of my clothes overseas. Today all the cars that you buy are current models. Today, all my clothes I can get in India. I am one of those people who likes to live on processed cheese, and it was difficult to get good processed cheese in Pune at that time. Today you can get a huge selection in 5 shops within walking distance of where I live. And I would remind you that in 1991, if you wanted a phone, you booked it 5 years ahead of when you thought you might need it, because there was this huge shortage economy. And today, you just need to walk outside and it's all accessible and easy. So all of this today is on a par with that in any international city. And indeed, if you take today a flight from London Airport or New York Airport and land in Bombay or Delhi Airport, you have the distinct impression that you've left a third world country and are arriving in a first world one. So we have transformed product and service markets and transformed industry corresponding with that, which provides these products and services. The second thing is growing Indian multinationals. Companies like Tata Motors or Tata Steel or Tata Chemicals or Tata Tea, Mahindras and Mahindras, our IT service businesses, including KPIT, DRL, Sun Pharma, Cipla, Biocon. These are all companies that have now significant operations overseas. Many of them get over half their business from outside of India. So there's a lot of change. Now, you know all this, so why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because I'm sort of setting the context of things that have changed either not at all or much less. What are those? So let me give you 3 things that I think have not changed that much. First, if you take the share of manufacturing in GDP, the share of manufacturing in GDP in 2016 is almost exactly what it was in 1991 at 15%. Right? That's in spite of all the talk about raising the share of manufacturing in GDP from the last government, by the present government, and indeed by us in CI and the Maratha Chamber and so on. Yeah? So the manufacturing share in GDP has been pretty well stuck at 15% now for 25 years, for a long time. It went up a bit in between. It's come back down. It's back to where it was in 1991. Even more so, the growth that we've seen in manufacturing, and you shouldn't doubt that there hasn't been growth in manufacturing. The economy in these 25 years has grown at an average rate of just around 7%, just under 7%. So manufacturing, if its share has stayed the same, that means manufacturing has grown also at just under 7%, which is a decent rate of growth. It's not a bad rate of growth, right? But if we want to raise the share, by the way, to 25%, then we actually need to grow manufacturing at around 15% year on year for the next 10 years. If we grow at 15% a year for the next 10 years, then we will match the best record of countries like South Korea and China. South Korea in the 70s and 80s, and China in the last 20 years. So second thing is that even more, the growth in manufacturing has not been accompanied by growth in jobs in manufacturing, at least not by growth in what we would describe as manufacturing sector jobs. And we have no, to take an example, we have no similar plant to the Foxconn plant in China. Foxconn employs 1.4 million people in China. They're the Taiwanese company that makes things like mobile phones, all the Apple mobile phones and so on. And Foxconn, of their 1.4 million people that they employ in China, 400,000 people work in a single factory. It's a large factory, multi-storied, many buildings. This factory with a 400,000 workforce in one factory has a labor turnover rate of 19% a month, right, a month, which says to me that 80,000 people a month get a better job in manufacturing, which says something about the vibrancy of that manufacturing environment and the vibrancy of the manufacturing job market. Now we might, Foxconn's not alone. A large-scale garment factory in China would employ 25,000, even 50,000 or 60,000 people. A large-scale garment factory in India would employ 5,000, 6,000 people. So again, an order of magnitude different in terms of our definitions of large scale. So we might argue that a future that looks like China of large-scale, labor-intensive manufacturing is not for India. It's at least not for this talk. But it's a different construct. It requires a different set of things, and it's, I'm pretty sure, a different talk. And I'm not the fellow to give it either. But we might then say that if that's not our construct, that's not going to be our manufacturing future, large-scale, labor-intensive manufacturing, then what is our manufacturing future? Where do we expect the vibrant manufacturing to come from? And we might say that the future should look more like a German future than a Chinese future. A future built around innovation, a future built around technology, a future built around knowledge and skills. So how are we doing with innovation? And that's what I want to talk about. So while our product and service markets have been transformed, our innovation system has not been. There are a few companies that are honorable exceptions, but their performance has not changed the overall data much, and I'll show you some of this data in a minute. And the story of these select companies needs to become much more typical for us to achieve a future that's consistent with the vibrant, dynamic manufacturing future that we aspire to. Right? So what I'm going to do is to take you through some tables to show you where our innovation system is. So let's see if I can do that. It's working. Yeah, it's on both screens. Thanks. Yeah. So this first table shows you R&D as a percentage of GDP over time for a bunch of what one would call newly industrializing countries. And it's sort of R&D as a percentage of GDP over the last 35 years. Yeah? And I'll just point out one comparison, again, the India-China comparison to you. Look at India-China in 1992 and India-China in 2014. Right? So in 1992, both India and China, we both had roughly the same percentage of GDP invested in R&D, 0.6, 0.7%. In 2014, China invests about 2.2% to our 2.1% to our 0.9%. Yeah? Now, the Chinese economy in the same period of time was growing much faster than the Indian economy, right? And as a result, if you look at the next slide and look at who does the R&D now, so China today is the world's second largest performer of R&D, and you end up today with a situation where China today invests over 10 times what India does in R&D. We'll talk about some more numbers in a minute. But if you look at global R&D, the world spends about $1.5 trillion on R&D each year. This R&D is hugely concentrated. The top 5 countries account for about 2/3 of the world total. So the top 5 out of whatever, 210 countries account for about 2/3 of total global R&D. And if you start looking at the firm level, it's even more concentrated. So firms account for about 2/3 again of global R&D. And if you look at select firms, you see even greater concentration. The top 20 companies, and this is out of millions of companies worldwide, right? The top 20 companies in the world account for 21% of total global industrial R&D. The top 300 companies account for about 2/3 of total global industrial R&D worldwide. So what it says, the message if you like, is that the R&D business worldwide is a hugely concentrated business. It happens largely in firms. It happens largely in a few giant firms. And this is where the world's R&D happens. Yeah? And R&D has a very direct and strong connection with innovation. Innovation is broader, but R&D is certainly for most fields the key underlying investment that one makes to get more innovation. Okay. If you look at R&D in firms again, and you now do the India-China comparison, right, it would tell you that Chinese firms today spend around 20 times what Indian firms spend on R&D. Right? Korean firms spend about 6 times as much as Indian firms in total spend on R&D. And if you want the German number, it's about 12 times what all Indian firms between them spend on R&D. Right? So we have a huge gap to address in our own ambitions for innovation. So our challenge, if you like, in R&D then ends up being a threefold challenge. We have to grow our share of R&D as a percentage of GDP. We have to grow the corporate share. If you look at this same table, you'll see that about 1/3 of total national R&D in India is done in firms. In almost every other country, the proportion is much closer to 2/3, right? It's 70% for the world, and typically China is closer to 80%, Korea is closer to 80%, Japan closer to 80%, and so on. right? So the bulk of R&D happens in firms around the world. In India, only about a third of national R&D happens in firms. So we need to grow the corporate share is, if you like, the first message, and I'll keep coming back to that and spend most of my time on that. The second message from this table is the very low university share. At 4% of total national R&D, India is the lowest among all major economies in terms of the proportion of R&D done within the education system. And there's a particular reason for this. And the particular reason is that in the 50s, under Prime Minister Nehru, we made the call of investing public research in autonomous R&D labs and set up autonomous R&D labs like the CSR lab system, but not only CSR, CSIR, DRDO for defense, the Agricultural Research Network, the Space Research Network, and a whole lot of others. And we decided, and we today have in the country about 300 government labs, which account for, if you look at the number, where's the public research number, 61% of our total national R&D spending. And then 4% is actually in the university system. And this is an underlying and ongoing problem for us as a country, which we haven't begun to address yet, and isn't adequately recognized even as a problem that we need to address. Yeah? So one of the objectives of going around and talking about this subject is to actually raise the concern that we should all have about this issue, because it doesn't receive any attention. And until it starts to receive serious attention, we will not start to seriously reform our public research system and start to improve it. So why should you do public research in the university and not in autonomous labs? For two reasons. The biggest reason is that education benefits as a result. The biggest benefit of having research done in the university system is that students, especially graduate students, but also undergraduates, learn how to do research alongside scientists. In other words, they learn how to do research as apprentices to scientists, the best researchers who are around. And this apprenticeship of research is an essential way in which a country trains its people how to do research and how to do good research, because they are doing the research, doing the education alongside people who are really good at it. But the benefit is not only for education. The benefit is also for research. Why? Because as any of you who've been at a US university where a lot of research happens knows, you have a lot of very smart and very cheap labor actually doing the research for you. So you have these highly intelligent graduate students who, by the way, come from all around the world. You know, a few years back, the US was very concerned because the number of PhDs that they were producing in electrical engineering for Americans dropped to second place. The first place was Taiwan. I mean, this little island with 20 million people was educating more PhDs in electrical engineering in the US than America was, which is striking. But it also means that the US and US universities were benefiting from this huge human resource of these really bright PhD students who were working for a fraction of what they would work for as soon as they got their degrees and then went out into the job market. So both education benefits and research benefits, provided one does the research in the university system. Okay, now come back to the other question. Why is our corporate R&D so low? Right. So let's look at the next table. And the next table, these are the top, this is a database that the EU puts out every year for the top 2,500 global R&D spenders. And between them, I think they account for, I'm trying to remember the exact number, but I think they account for about 85% of total global industrial R&D spending. So it's pretty representative. And if you look at those, it says that the top 3 sectors, again a part of concentration, the top 3 sectors account for about half of all the global R&D. And one of the things that it shows is that the top 10 sectors at about 80%. But one of the things that this shows is that if you look at the Indian presence in this 2,500 list, we have 26 firms in the 2,500 against 300 for China, for example. We're missing from 5 out of the 10 top sectors. We have no firms in 5 out of the top 10 sectors. So no firms in electronic and electrical equipment, no firms in technology, hardware and equipment, no firms in aerospace and defense, no firms in healthcare equipment. Yeah? And these are 5 sectors which are leading sectors where you have a lot of R&D investment taking place worldwide, where India has no firms in the top 2,500 global R&D spenders. And these sectors, these missing sectors, are not just missing for R&D. I mean, if you think about it, they're missing for industry too. We do not have a technology hardware sector. We do not have an electronic and electrical equipment sector. We really do not have an aerospace and defense sector. It's just starting now in the private sector. We do not have a healthcare equipment sector that is seriously technology intensive and competitive. Yeah? And then there are 2 more sectors here where we have 1 firm each in the top 2,500, as you can see, in chemicals and in engineering. Okay? So the first lesson, in a sense, is we need to get into sectors that require more R&D. Yeah? And I'll come back to those conclusions in a minute. Okay. So what would transformation look like? If we really wanted to transform our innovation system and our R&D system, what would it look like? And that's sort of table 4. And what I would point to you is that look at the South Korea numbers for 1970 to 1990, which is the time that the South Korean innovation system was transformed in that 20-year period. Look at the first table is India and South Korea. The second one is actually India and China, right? And the India and China, the transformation in China took place in the last 20 years, between about 1995 and 2015. Okay? So what does transformation then look like? Well, first you see the R&D as a percentage of GDP rise significantly. In Korea's case, from 0.4% of GDP to 1.9%. Second, you see the share of industry in total R&D rise also very significantly. In Korea's case, from 13% to 81%, right? So you have in Korea a rising share of a rapidly growing GDP. And you end up with this double multiple, which says that actually industrial R&D in Korea in 1990, if you run the numbers, industrial R&D in 1990 is about 100 times in real terms what it was in 1970. So you have this dramatic expansion of R&D in a relatively short 20-year period. And if we expect to be able to transform our own industrial system and our own innovation system in the next 20 years, we need to do something similar kind of scale. For China, also fairly dramatic. Percentage of GDP in 1996, 0.6%, rising to 2.1%, share of industry going from 43% to 77%. And again, with Chinese GDP in the same period growing even faster than Korea was growing between 1970 and 1990, right? Growing in this period at over 10% year on year. Yeah? So again, a rising share of a rapidly growing denominator, for rapidly growing GDP. Yeah? So how do you then, if you say what would it take then to become like Germany, to to have a national innovation system which delivers? Well, I think there are 4 things that we have to do. So first is structural change in industry. And I'm just going to, okay, I'll come to that, the next one in a minute, 1 second. Right. So the first thing is structural change in industry. We need to grow new sectors. All those missing R&D intense sectors, so technology, hardware, electronics, aerospace, healthcare, etc. And we need to grow them as manufacturing sectors, not R&D sectors, manufacturing sectors first. So I think the attempts by the government to attract, for example, Foxconn, to set up a large assembly plants, or large assembly plants, I suppose, in India, is exactly the right thing. We need many of those manufacturing plants to begin to form a kind of demand pool for the subsequent R&D work. So the first thing is structural change, with new sectors emerging, especially all of these sectors that require R&D. Second is we need to invest much more in R&D in our firms and grow the share to world level. And we have a huge advantage in the country in relatively low-cost technical people that we don't take advantage of, but which multinationals do. So if you look at the numbers, it says that of the 100 top R&D spenders worldwide, 83 have R&D facilities in India. So the multinationals recognize that we're a good country to do R&D in. We should too. You take companies like Emerson or Cummins in Pune that each has their second largest R&D facility worldwide here, or you take GE or AstraZeneca in Bangalore, again, each has their second largest R&D facility worldwide in India. GE, for example, employs, as you know, 5,500 people, but what's not less well known is that 2,000 of them are PhDs. So they have actually, at the GE labs in Bangalore, they have the largest concentration of PhDs in the country, whether in any government institute or private sector institute. So it's a very high concentration. And it's the potential that exists in the country if we choose to take it. As we invest more as firms in R&D, then our demand for more advanced talent will also grow. You know, one of the things that, I see Ajay sitting there, one of the things that Ajay will tell you is that the PhD programs at the IITs suffer from a lack of demand from industry. Industry is not that keen to hire much of the output of PhDs from our best technical institutes in the country. And the reason is that we don't do enough R&D. If we did a lot more R&D, we would actually have a demand for more advanced technical people, and there we would address then many of these problems. Third, the point that I made earlier about moving public research to the university system. We can, at least to start off with, grandfather the problem and not start any more autonomous labs. But this is not a lesson that's being learned. In the 11th plan, we started 11 more autonomous institutes. In the 12th plan, we've proposed starting 7 more autonomous institutes. So at the minimum, all incremental government funding for R&D should happen in the university system. That should be the minimum requirement. And then over a period of time, we can actually fundamentally reform the lab system itself by, for example, saying, here's the total pool of funds, and let all the labs compete together with the university system for research funding for that pool of funds. And if they can't compete, they don't exist. The final point is that we need to grow then a bunch of multinationals that have Indian roots. So one of the ways in which Korea grew, and China to a large extent also, grew many of their most vibrant companies was by having companies that invested in technology, but then used and they invested in technology very often with a lot of government protection and everything else. But then they competed at the same time in world markets. They had a strong, aggressive presence in world markets. And because they had to compete with the best firms worldwide in world markets, that was a very useful feedback loop and discipline and flow of technology too, back to these firms on what it actually took to be a successful, vibrant company. So the last slide that I'll show you actually gives you the top 10 R&D spenders in each of South Korea, China, and India. And just to point out some of these same numbers again. If you take the top Chinese firm, Huawei, the company that makes routers, spends about $7 billion on R&D worldwide. The $7 billion compares with about $6 billion that's spent by all firms in India on R&D. Yeah? So the top Chinese company is equal to all companies in India in terms of investment in R&D. You take the top Korean company, Samsung, which by the way is also the second largest R&D spender worldwide, right? At $17 billion or $16 billion, right? That's about what India invests in R&D as a country. All funding, all spending, government and private put together. Yeah? So the scale that we have to aspire to is massive. And the challenge of growing this investment as we grow our firms is also huge. And we shouldn't underestimate it, but we also shouldn't underestimate the potential when we get there. Because the potential of actually establishing companies where we can have technology leading positions, right? It's not something that, you know, companies luck into. It happens because they are otherwise threatened with extinction and they invest in R&D because this gives them a platform which they can use to play worldwide. So let me stop there and then we'll turn it over to questions and so on. I think we have time.
Why? Wow, I won't say another word to that. I'll just come to the Q&A. So Dr. Forbes has kindly agreed to take a few questions. If you could please raise your hand, the mic would come to you and then you would be able to ask question. Yeah, we'll start from here.
I'll start with the last slide, which is on the table here. It's very interesting to see that if you look at the R&D spend from India, we have manufacturing companies like Tata Motors, Mahindra, quite a few, HAL, BHEL on the site. In China and Korea, you look at this thing, there is no manufacturing company in any of this. Does that mean that today R&D is more driven in the electronics and software alone, or any thoughts on why we don't see manufacturing companies in these two areas?
These are the companies that have a lot of spending on R&D. So you'll see a lot of electronic and technology hardware companies. Samsung in particular, a large proportion of their total spending is semiconductors and R&D for semiconductors. That's the single big chunk in there, probably half of the total. But I didn't put up Germany here, right? But if you look at the German list, you'll see lots of manufacturing, mechanical manufacturing companies. You have all the auto companies. So all the big, not just 3 but 4 of them. Volkswagen, by the way, is the world's largest R&D spender at $17 billion. So you have all the auto companies, and then you have the big chemical companies in Germany. So those are you'll see it. It depends a little bit on what sectors are really strong in
there is a huge gap vis-a-vis even Korea in terms of R&D, in terms of investments. But the question is why? To give a little of my own input, I am a scientist. R&D requires, short-term R&D must produce results so that corporates get interested. Long-term R&D must be supported with a vision of a long term. Unfortunately, in our country, the short-term focus of the companies has been so short that the R&D is really not worth investing. They can get their technology inputs from outside. In the public sector, government sector, the visions are more for getting votes rather than producing results. So in this kind of a dilemma, what is it that, and I'm not sure government can change very fast, but I'm sure the corporate sector can change very fast because they have to compete worldwide. So what is it specifically that corporate sector in India needs to do? Number one, to attract talent. Number two, to give a little midterm objective visions. And number three, to get competitive worldwide. Only then you can afford to do R&D. I mean, if the R&D doesn't pay back, you can't. So maybe with your wide experience, you can throw some light.
define their business as services. Most of the software companies is in relation to the software technology, software tools. It is not related to hard product in the areas in which they work. Most of the software companies are far more horizontal in their nature rather than vertical. And therefore the R&D doesn't transcend IT into, it doesn't transcend and go into maybe physics or technology of the industry that we are in. And I think that's the problem. And I think the issue is a bit more deep in the sense that why is it that we as a country shy away from exploring new frontiers on our own? Why is it that we would be far more comfortable, as Amit mentioned, of going out and buying technology from something rather than building it on our own? And I think that it's a far more core issue that we need to do.
There are lots more tables in this in this presentation. I don't know if you have, some of you have copies of them. So you can have a look at all the tables later on, but let me just go to the last one that I didn't want. If you look at the charges for the use of intellectual property, this is how much technology do we import as a country relative to others. So if you go back, if you go back to 1998, we imported very little technology relative to others. $200 million a year relative to, let's say, a Brazil at $1 billion a year. I couldn't get the China numbers for 1998. Right? But even Korea, 2.4 billion and so on. Right? If you look, you look today, 2014, right? Today we import a lot more of technology, about $5 billion a year, right? Relative to Brazil, again, 6 billion, Korea now at about 10 billion, China at 23 billion, right? So we're now a sort of equal player where we were almost not there on the technology import map 20 years ago. We're today a significant importer of technology, right? But we might start thinking then that the problem is that we choose to import rather than invest in technology. That's not right, right? The most vibrant innovation countries in the world all import a lot of technology, but they also then invest a lot in R&D.
Also export.
Right?
Also export.
Yeah, but you know, exports of technology should not be an objective. Yeah? Exports of products should be. Exports of technology, if it happens, fine. If it doesn't happen, it's also fine. Import of technology, because you're using technology and putting it to use, is a good idea. And then you supplement it with a lot of your own work, it's an even better idea. I think, you know, it's not because we import technology, right? It's not because our firms aren't rich enough. It's not because we don't take risk. And I don't think it's because we have a short-term outlook. I think it's because it's not part of our mindset to actually invest substantially in technology. I think it's a matter of actually figuring out how to do it. I mean, I can say for us as a company, right, that we started investing in technology maybe significantly, actually, together with reforms, 1991, when we said, look, when after Manmohan Singh's budget in 1991, we said, okay, what would we make if tariffs for everything that we make was zero? Yeah, they weren't zero yet. They were still 200% or something. We said, if there's zero, what would we make and how would we compete? And we started investing significantly in R&D at that time. And it took us at least 5 years to get the first decent product out the door. Because we just messed around for a long period of time trying to figure out, you know, how do you actually come up with a product where you have to come up with specifications which in the end the customer actually wants to buy. It takes a while to learn that. And I think one has to just take that plunge. I think there's a role for the government in this. You take the two sectors where we have truly world-leading industries, right? IT services and pharmaceuticals. We have world-leading industries, export-oriented industries in both cases, right? So if you ask me, what the government should be doing is funding a lot of public research within the university system in the broad area of computer science and in the broad area of healthcare, pharmaceuticals, diseases, etc. Right? What do we actually do? Right? Less than 4% of our total national R&D, right, public R&D, goes into anything related to health. Right? Less than 1% goes into anything related to computer science. Right? These are easy wins for us as a country. It can create that human capital that can later on go and work for Ravi and do good R&D.
My question is that is innovation really about economics? Is it about how much money you pump in? Or is it really, as you said, is it about mindset? Is it about social? Is it about a lack of political and industrial leadership being averse to challenging the status quo? I mean, how important is the social and mindset issue to this?
So it's definitely the mindset, but you have to supplement that mindset with a willingness to invest, with a willingness to experiment, with a willingness to have projects fail, and to learn from the failed project and do another one.
So you talked about the 4 approaches we can take over the next few years, and specifically I want to ask you about the 300 R&D labs that the government is managing. It seems very logical to make that transition to a university-based system, but we're talking about a few years. My question is more in the 5-year time frame. Is it possible? First question is there a lot of intellectual capital that is not commercialized that certainly the country can benefit from? And does it require a different approach? Perhaps there's a way to marry it up with Startup India and really open these labs to create maybe a couple of 100 companies, let's say 5 companies each from each lab, and suddenly you have 1,500 companies that can potentially commercialize if there is a big amount of locked-in intellectual capital. Your comments, please.
He did great work with CSR in terms of reorienting the CSR labs to a much more outward-looking mindset, and where the content of work and so on that was done was much richer. Right? The point I'm trying to make is that trying to connect labs with industry is, if you ask me, putting effort into solving the wrong problem. Right? And we might come up with the right answer, but I think it's the wrong problem. The right problem to work on is how do you actually move that work into the university system, right? And no question you have to do it. You can't, no one's going to, I would be the most shocked if someone tomorrow decided to close all the labs and say go to work for universities, right? But you can start transitioning it. So the first thing you can do is you can say all incremental investment will go to the university system, right? And you can say all incremental investment in real terms. In a year's time, all incremental investment, full stop, including inflation, will go to the university system, right? In 5 years' time, as a lab, you need to be self-standing, right? You need to start teaching in universities, but not good enough to teach in the university and do research in your lab, right? The important thing is that the research and the teaching has to happen together, because you want your student to learn alongside where the research is being done. Yeah, that's the education benefit. That's the point of training researchers. Yeah? So don't solve that problem, right? We've tried, right? For years, we complained that CSR is not connected to industry. So what did we do? We created a separate institution called NRDC, the National Research and Development Corporation, whose sole job was to connect CSR labs to industry and to market their work, right? You know what the result was? The few labs that had direct connections lost them, right? It's trying to solve the wrong problem. We should really solve the right problem, which is move the work over a period of time to the university system.
We'll take Mr. Mirashi. I think possibly with permission of chair, we could then conclude the question answer session.
Okay. I just wanted to bring in the startup and MSME angle. You've talked about the R&D spend of the large companies, the top 10 companies in various sectors and countries. But there are some examples, especially again in the US and the Silicon Valley, where we've seen startups make some real fantastic R&D investments. And then those companies have grown on to become the Apples and the HPs and the Intels in just 2-3 decades. In India, today we see a lot more focus on startup innovation, at least the government-led side, and of course in the popular press. I'm not saying which is right, which is wrong, whether R&D focus should be more on the large established companies or the small startups, but would like to get your views on both sides, pros, cons. Both is always the easy answer, but how do you prioritize it? Since you didn't talk about that topic, I thought I'll bring it up.
By the way, one of the problems for us as a country is that our data is lousy. We used to have actually very good R&D data some years ago, but then the person in DSIR who actually made sure we had good data retired. And after she retired, the data just declined and almost vanished. I mean, you now need to almost mine it. Yeah? One of the casualties as a result was that all the data on R&D in startups is not counted as R&D. So, because if you have a startup that's not making any money, there's no incentive in counting its R&D as R&D, so they don't. And it doesn't show in any data anywhere. So that's part of the problem. Now, having said that, I'm not sure that there's that much of what would count as R&D that's actually happening within startups for a specific reason, which is that most of our startups are at the interface of technology and service. They're at the interface. They are very clever and very innovative apps or aggregators or whatever, right? But the kind of work that's involved is not necessarily what you'd normally call R&D. But that doesn't. But honestly, I mean, I don't care about that. I think the more of that you have going on, it's still innovation. It's still very beneficial for the country. Yeah? What we need is many more startups in the manufacturing area, where we really suffer. I mean, we just do not have a vibrant startup environment for manufacturing.
I'm going to take the one who raised the hand first, then I'll come to.
Hello. Good evening, sir. My name is Prahlad Tade. I am from PS Modern College of Engineering, Pune. I am final year engineering student. My question is, 80% or 90% engineers that are graduates pass out from non-IITs and the non-high paid colleges like mine. So my colleagues, as I know, my colleagues or my seniors know about the R&D, research and development, once they start doing work in companies and not while doing education. So is it the part of individual student, college? It is the responsibility of college, individual student, or government?
I'm one of those people who, generally speaking, when I want solutions, I rarely look at the state, because I prefer to look at what we can do in companies, either individually or collectively. But in terms of the research being done in the education sector is a state responsibility. You take the most vibrant private universities around the world that do a lot of R&D. The bulk of their research funding comes from the state. Yeah? The bulk, meaning 90% plus, comes from the government. In the US, it will be the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation. These are the big sources of research funding for the education sector, even in private institutes. That's what we need, even in private institutes in the country. And by the way, I think the initiative announced in the last budget to make 10 public and 10 private universities world-class is quite a landmark announcement, because it was 10 public and 10 private, not only 10 public, right? Because the only way you can make 10 private universities world-class is if you actually provide them with some of this research funding. So it'll be interesting to see how that announcement gets turned into actual policy.
Any mention about agricultural research, though India has, this is the most important sector. Can you throw some light on it?
A good reason and a bad reason that you didn't see anything much for agricultural research. The bad reason is that I don't know anything about it. the good reason, or maybe that's the good reason, I'm not sure. But the good reason, the good reason, if you like, is that the total quantum of agricultural research that happens today, right, is located in, it's a relatively small activity in numbers, relative to all the other spending that's going on in other sectors. And it tends to be located in relatively few companies. It tends to be located within a relatively small number of seed companies, for example, or fertilizer companies or something worldwide. Yeah. Now, is there something that we can do very usefully there in that area? I'm sure that there is. One of the most productive areas where there was state intervention in the 30s in many parts of the world was with agricultural extension programs. But those were largely focused on diffusion, where a new seed, in particular hybrid seeds at that time, how do you actually diffuse them most efficiently and ensure as quick a pickup by farmers as possible? And those efforts were very productive. By the way, one of the big sources, you have a nice source of funding for agricultural research from many of the large international research institutions. And international research institutions like the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines, or there are many leading international institutes that are very well funded and do very good work. And the question then is a diffusion question of how do you actually get those innovations out into the market. But not my area.
I'll now be requesting Mr. Pandit, but I must mention this before I invite him. As Dr. Forbes said, as many decades ago, he went to Mr. Pandit to take some inputs. We thought we'll get Mr. Pandit here so that you all get some inputs. So may I now request Mr. Pandit to give his concluding remarks.
Thank you, Naushad, for that most illuminating talk. Now, see, as Naushad mentioned, I met Naushad more than 30 years ago when he was still a student at Stanford and wanted to do research on technical entrepreneurship in India. And together we talked about quite a few technology entrepreneurs companies in Pune. And I have always been tremendously impressed by not only his intellect, but a sense of curiosity and a little bit of sense of mischief. That has stayed the same, but I must say he has become far more erudite, and I don't use my words loosely. He has become far more erudite in the last 30 years. I must say, Naushad, we are proud of you. I'm very, very proud of you. So excellent and very well researched talk. And I think to a gathering of industrialists, I think it provides a mirror for self-reflection. Not a very pleasing mirror, but a very true mirror. It is ruthlessly honest. And I think the question that it asks is that we need to do, or the statement it makes is we need to do more in R&D or in entrepreneurship or in technical innovation than what we are doing. To me, it is also a statement which tells us we have to look at within ourselves, at ourselves, to see what is it that we need to do differently. And Naushad mentioned that when he was answering one of the questions, and he mentioned that when you are tackling a problem like this, our natural tendency is to look at the government, whereas our natural tendency should be to look at us. And I think that is very important. So, typically a chairman's job is to give some concluding remarks. What I would like to do is to maybe complement his talk with a bit of personal experience. I think that that is something which might give an additional dimension to the topic that we are talking about. And I want to talk a bit about the journey that we had in our company on R&D and innovation. And I want to talk about both sides of experiences, and I want to just share my view about what is it that you need to do to actually push the envelope on R&D. And I believe that there are many people in Pune, many companies in Pune, and many people here, especially like Anu, who can talk authoritatively, and Naushad himself, authoritatively about innovation in companies, corporate innovations. And I'm just sharing my view, and I don't know what are the experiences of others, but I thought I should just put my things on the table. So, our tendency is, of course, when you talk of innovation system in the country, is to look at the government and say, what it does and what it does not do. So I must start by saying what has been our experience with the government, and then I want to tell you what is it that we are doing, in the hope that, those of you who are passionate about this topic will take something home with you. So, having read that there is governmental funding available for R&D, we looked at least 7 years to see whether there are some funding for a relevant topic. And, we are passionate about 2 areas as a company. We are passionate about transportation, and we are passionate about energy. One of the areas of transportation is automotives, and one of the core areas of automotives is electronics, and one of the core areas within automotive electronics, communication between the various ECUs inside a vehicle. Now there are some global standards whereby vehicles talk to each other, and the standards are called AUTOSAR. And as you can rightly expect, that the whole development of these standards started in Germany, because they are truly the leaders of innovation in automotive. They are truly the leaders in modern area of automotives, which is electronics, and therefore in this. And we have been one of the very initial companies deeply engaged in this. And so we have been engaged with AUTOSAR. And at one point in time, I thought that, hey, this AUTOSAR is actually meant for high-end cars. It's bulky, it's expensive. And we said that, what? I think we should come up with something which is for the emerging markets, for the emerging cars. And we went to the government and we said, we need to develop a different AUTOSAR which has a small footprint, which does all the critical functions, but at a much lower price point. And so we went there and we talked to the highest, should I say, the authority in this area, which is the, I don't know the designation, but principal scientific advisor to the Prime Minister. Okay. And we said, this is what we should do. And innocent as I was at that time, I tried and tried and tried. And then later on said, this is not going to work anymore. And I let it go, only to read about 1.5 years later that China has picked up the initiative of mini AUTOSAR. They came out with the mini AUTOSAR and they are using it in China. Our government had a quandary saying that, if we were to give money to a private company, which is actually a profit-making company, will my hands be treated as they are dirty, right? So essentially the thought process was, I don't want to give anything. Now we have, of course, learned the game. And now and we are still doing research, we are doing a lot of research. But the game now, as I understand, is to join hands with an R&D institution so that together you can do something, provided you find the right people in R&D institution. I'll come to that in a moment. But it's a learning for me. I personally believe it would be wrong for a person to say that, working with the government, you don't get government funding, let's not do any work at all. I think you have to find out your way around it, and I think we have found the way about. That's as far as the funding in R&D is concerned. The second issue was this whole business of tax deduction for R&D. Now, IT is an important sector in India. IT is supposed to be working on cutting edge, and IT can be innovative. So, we went and we said that, through R&D expense that we do, we said that, we need to get R&D deduction. And I was very surprised to hear from the first level of the tax authorities saying that unless you pay excise duty, you cannot get R&D deduction. that was completely a stunner for me, because, what has excise duty got to do? Then said, no, this R&D is for manufacturing. If you are manufacturing, you should be paying excise duty. Only if you are paying excise duty, you can actually qualify. And of course, I rebelled against it, and you mentioned about Dr. Mashelkar, and we went to Dr. Mashelkar, and I said that this is just mind-boggling, and we could get that through, so, something happened. Then working about research labs. So we tried for about 5 years looking at labs, and the issue was that, which is the best lab in the country which works in an area of our interest. And our area of interest is automotive, our area of interest is energy storage, etc. Drew a blank till we found the right answer. So, you don't work with a lab. I think you work with a professor, okay? And I think that's true all over the world. So essentially what you really need to do is to get those 1 or 2 professors who are passionate about what they are doing, who are not 9 to 5, who are like Pied Pipers, who can get bunch of bright students with them. Because as you rightly mentioned, R&D is done by a combination of a bright professor and possibly equally bright and sometimes brighter students. And they are the PhD students who are working on some cutting edge things. And we found the persons, we found 2 professors actually. We work actually in the area of new energy generation, and like Anu works in the area of hydrogen fuel cell. We work on the area of hydrogen fuel cells for the automotive application. We work in the area of batteries, and we have found excellent professors to work with, and we have found excellent students to work with. Actually, 3 of those students post their PhDs have joined us, and they're some of the best colleagues that I have. Highly inquisitive minds, very passionate, very hardworking, coming out with different ideas, pulsating minds, I should say. Okay. We have found that. What we have found also is that you need to be spatially lucky to be able to retain those PhD students after they finish their PhD. Why do you have to be lucky? Because there is this magnet east of India called South Korea. They have research labs where they give extraordinary grants for students. And they are attracting a lot of Indian talent to go there. So one of the brightest kids who worked on a project with us on supercapacitors and batteries, he finished his PhD, and he got an offer from a university in Seoul. That department was led by one of the brightest professors whom they had picked up from the US. So they picked up the professor from the US, they picked up the students from India. And this student has been away for about a year or so. And so he was in Pune recently, and I asked him, what do you do? So he said he is looking at different chemistries of materials which can be very good to be used in batteries, okay, for batteries, yeah. And he said, I asked him, so what do you think are good materials? So he said, no, I don't know what those materials are, because I get packets with number written on it without the chemical composition of that material, and I have to do testing over multiple cycles with different C ratings, with different temperatures. So I said, what exactly are you doing there? Now, this is something which a technician can do. But he said, you know what? It's a very good university. There are a lot of other students around. I learn from the students, but I don't know the results of my own research. Okay? And so, I mean, this is, but the magnet is the investment that you do through the universities to get the best of the, young PhDs. And I think that is something that we are missing on. So this is what I should say are some of the hurdles that you have to cross. But I must say that every year for the last 10 years, our investment in R&D has gone up. And that is because that one thing, in my opinion, which I think is very critical, and Naushad didn't mention it in those many words, I think it is passion. I think that only thing that can drive you to doing better and better R&D, more and more R&D, is I think passion also a confidence that you can do something, and a challenging spirit which can say, you know what, I have less money than others, but I think we have better brains than many others, so we can do a better job than others. And here is an area which I feel so passionate about that I am willing to break a paradigm and do something more in that area. And what we have found, for example, everybody in our company is very passionate about clean, okay? So we work in automotive area. So we started working first in automotive area in a software, right? We are a software company. And when I quickly realized that there is only so much you can do in software, and there is also a lot you can do in software. For example, in automotives, in software, issues such as, all of us read about autonomous cars, right? So autonomous cars is all about image processing. It's all about image processing at a speed and at a small electronic footprint. So you have to come out with different algorithms which can recognize objects very, very quickly, because you don't want to recognize here is a human being crossing that road after you have hit that human being. So you have to look at the speed of your car, the distance from that, and at a certain speed you should get a very quick alert saying that, hey, you're likely to hit something. So that is definitely pure software, algorithms, very good area to be in. But we realized that if you want to go deeper into that, you have to go into science, maybe into physics in particular, and then you have to marry physics and technology. And we have been working in the area of battery technologies. Here is a challenge that we thought that we need to pick up. So almost all the car companies in the world use lithium-ion batteries, and because they don't want to buy petrol, they don't want to buy fossil fuel, because you end up buying from Saudi or Iraq or Iran and those kind of countries. But mind you, when you buy lithium-ion batteries, you buy it from Chile and Bolivia and Afghanistan. Do they sound any different than the first three that I talked about? So we said, we need to figure out a way in which we can make batteries out of some other material. And we have been working on that for the last 2 years or so. I think we are very close to finding a solution where you can make a battery at much lower cost. You will do it because you will make it from material which is available globally. I think passion for that is important. We believe that, now cars are moving from not just battery electric vehicles, but fuel cell electric vehicle. And we have been working on fuel cells for the past 2 years. Excellent professors, excellent team, and a very good ecosystem. Anu's company is doing the same thing. Reliance is doing the same thing. We do some work together in some of those areas. So things to do. So I believe that I think one has to be passionate about something. One has to have a challenging mind, saying that there are big universities in the world and big companies in the world who are doing R&D. That shouldn't stop us from doing our own R&D, because and I like to tell people that innovation is in our mind, because in India you can't even cross a street without being innovative. We have to be innovative all the time. It's in our mind, and I'm sure we will succeed. The issue is, what is it that we need to spend our innovative energies on? And I know Naushad, again, in his nice way, didn't talk very firmly about it, but quite a bit of the work that is being done currently is innovation on apps. How you can do e-commerce. I have nothing against e-commerce, but I think the challenges that we have in the world are also a little more fundamental. Can we do something on environment? Can we do something on energy? Can we do something on agriculture? Can we do something on food production? Can we do something on water? These are problems crying to be solved. And I'm sure we can solve them here. It doesn't take a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot of money. I think it just calls for passion. As I said, passion and confidence that you can do it too. And so I just tried to I wanted to give like a personal side to the issues that he raised. Naushad, I must tell you that this was very good. This was eye-opening, and a lot of us learned so much from it. So I want to thank you for this talk. And I'm going to urge both the chamber and the PIC to get Naushad to us a little more often. He has been very, very engaged in the last 2 years as the president of CII, national president of CII. And that's not luckily a lifetime presidentship. So he's going to be free after some time. And Naushad, we depend on you a lot. Okay? Look forward to it. And thank you very much.
another minute for me to propose vote of thanks on behalf of all of you before we announce that we conclude the program. While you applaud and put your hands together, may I request Mr. Pandit to please give a tiny token of appreciation to Mr. Forbes. Of course, it's been fantastic listening to almost like 3 people at one go. That's the chairman of Forbes Marshall, that's the president of CII, and that's the professor of Stanford, all of it just at one go. It's been interesting while I talk of Stanford because I was just looking at the speakers, and on a lighter note, and some people did mention this in past, why do we have all of this bias on East Coast? Dr. Sharma, Dr. Kalyani, Mr. Chowdhury on either side of the Charles River. So all of them either in Harvard or MIT. But that's not exactly true. So I guess we have much of Stanford and rest of it as well out here. But that aside, a huge thanks to the chair here, the huge thanks to also Mr. Sardeshmukh and the MCCIA. Thank you to all of you who have come here. We will not take much time and we'll announce that the program is concluded. Thank you.